There are a few things that look more like a once-in-a-lifetime Thailand experience than being face-to-face with the apex predator on the planet. You can sit beside one, you can feed it. In some facilities, you can spend the entire day with one, and it's marketed as entirely safe. For tourists, it can be an incredible opportunity, and man, wouldn't it look good on your Instagram feed? But there is a question that has plagued Thailand's tiger tourism industry for years. How do you get a wild predator to behave like this around hundreds of tourists every single day? And more importantly, is this ethical? Are these tigers being properly cared for? What about the safety concerns for these tourists? On one side of the argument is that these facilities provide education, employment, veterinary care, and a way for people to experience animals they would never normally get a chance to see this close. However, on the other side of the argument, some researchers and animal welfare organizations argue that many of these attractions put entertainment ahead of the animal's welfare, and that some of the practices required by facilities like this are fundamentally incompatible with animal well-being. So, which is it? Thailand has a long history of keeping tigers in captivity, but the industry became particularly popular with tourist attractions where visitors could get extremely close to the animals. And we're not talking about a few isolated parks where this is a thing. A 2024 peer-reviewed study examining tiger facilities in Thailand estimated that 51 facilities housed around 1,962 tigers. The researchers assessed 34 tourism facilities in 2019, looking at things like nutrition, physical environment, health, behavior, and the animal's mental state. And of course, these are important numbers to understand because this gives us some real insight into the scale of these operations throughout Thailand and most of Southeast Asia for that matter. And the reason these animals are so valuable to the tourist industry is pretty obvious. People want to see them, and understandably, what would sound better to most tourists? Being able to look at these cats from a distance or being able to get up and close and take photos and videos? Especially over the past 10 years or so with the rise of social media, what looks more quintessential Thailand trip than being able to sit down and take a photo with the jungle's apex 400-pound predator? So what actually happens at some of these facilities? Well, according to recent studies and third-party welfare checks, the experiences vary considerably. Some facilities operate more like conventional zoos, where visitors observe tigers from behind barriers, while others offer face-to-face encounter with tigers as well as other animals. In some facilities, tourists are allowed to enter the cage, sit next to the tiger, play with the tiger's tail, even feed them in some cases. And this is in pretty stark contrast to what a lot of us in the West think of when we think of a tiger experience. One licensed facility, Tiger World Thailand, openly advertises experiences including sitting with and stroking tigers, bottle feeding cubs, and even having a tiger propped up on your shoulders. The facility says tiger welfare is its top priority and describes its animals as being under the supervision of experienced keepers. Now, you might be saying to yourself, because I definitely was, how can it be safe for a person to enter the cage with a full-grown tiger, especially somebody who's untrained, who has never met these animals before? And you would not be the only person to ask that question. Tigers in the wild are solitary, relatively lonely creatures, spending the vast majority of their lives completely alone, an ambush predator that has evolved over the years to not be seen. So the question really becomes, are these tigers actually being taken care of, considering their experience in some of these parks is the complete opposite of their natural existence in the wild? What does a good, fulfilling, healthy life look like for a tiger? And can that life realistically be provided in a facility whose business model depends on people paying to interact with the animals? Now, of course, a captive tiger isn't subject to the same life as a wild tiger. That's true of zoos around the world, and especially when it comes to captive breeding in some of these zoos, they have played a massive role in preserving the tiger population we do have. But the question that does arise for a lot of people is whether that captive environment provides enough opportunities for the animal to behave naturally and remain physically and psychologically healthy. A 2024 study of Thai tiger facilities found welfare concerns across several areas, including enclosure design, health, behavioral interactions, and mental well-being. And of course, that's important because an animal can appear physically healthy in all aspects, but still be mentally unhealthy in layman's terms. Another huge criticism of tiger tourism, not just in Thailand, but all over the world, has to do with breeding. Tiger cubs are extremely attractive to tourists. They're smaller, they're easier to handle, and of course, people are drawn to them because they're cute. However, a problem that can easily arise from this is one we've seen destroy countless other operations. It creates a financial incentive to keep the cubs coming, even if that might mean breeding practices that are far from beneficial to the animals themselves. Tigers, just like humans, and all animals for that matter, need a diverse gene pool when it comes to breeding, because if it's not diverse enough, it can start to lead to serious health problems down the road. Animal welfare researchers have also reported concerns about cubs being separated from their mothers at a young age so they can be used for tourist interactions. A report from the organization For Tigers, based on assessments of Thai facilities between 2017 and 2018, identified concerns including early separation of cubs from mothers, poor housing, lack of environmental enrichment, as well as training methods that were intended to get these tigers used to human interactions that is kind of counterintuitive to their natural behavior. And then, of course, another issue when cubs are the moneymaker, what happens when they grow up? Of course, a tiger cub does not stay a cute, cuddly, relatively harmless critter forever. And we're not talking about a 5-pound puppy that grows into a 50-pound dog. We're talking something that grows into essentially a 400-pound killing machine that can be very expensive to care for properly. And of course, a fully grown tiger is a lot more to manage in general, but especially when it comes to interactions with tourists. And that raises some understandable questions. A big one being, what happens to these animals when they are not so commercially lucrative? And as we mentioned briefly earlier, captive breeding is not something that's exclusive to Thailand, of course, and it's not inherently a bad thing. Breeding is, of course, a huge part of legitimate conservation efforts across the planet and across thousands of other facilities. However, with that in mind, a tiger, or any other animal for that matter that's born in captivity, isn't automatically helping with wild populations. In fact, conservation experts have repeatedly pointed out that many captive tigers are not suitable for release into the wild. They're often bred for captivity, accustomed to humans, and sometimes selected for particular physical characteristics that appeal to visitors. And this selective breeding often leads to yet another financial incentive that a lot of the time doesn't necessarily have the animal's best interest in mind. White tigers, for example, are particularly popular with tourists. But you may or may not know, white tigers are not a separate species. The white coat comes from a recessive genetic mutation, and producing more white tigers in captivity can involve breeding closely related animals. A 2026 scientific paper specifically examined the conservation and welfare concerns surrounding color morph tigers in zoos. So when you do see a rare colored tiger being advertised as a tourist attraction, there is an important question to ask. Was this animal bred with conservation in mind, or did this happen solely as an incentive to get tourists to come and pay to see it? Now, when it comes to tiger tourism in Thailand, there is one specific accusation I have seen repeated over and over. You've probably heard the claim that tourist tigers are drugged so people can sit beside them. It's been claimed about various tiger attractions all across Thailand as well as other countries, but this is an area where we do need to be careful because we only want to stick to the facts here, the things that we know, the things that have been investigated. Now, of course, there's a major difference between an accusation made online and evidence proving that a particular facility routinely does this to its animals. There are plenty of viral posts claiming that every sleepy tiger in a tourist park must be sedated. Now, here, that's not something that we can responsibly state as a fact. We've dug and dug and dug, and there have been countless, deep dives, people going to all types of facilities, checking in on these animals. And so far, as we can see, none of these claims are substantiated with any facts. Tigers, like most other cats, if you have a pet cat, they tend to just sleep the vast majority of the time. A tiger lying still doesn't by itself prove that that facility is drugging it. So if you're watching footage from one of these attractions and someone tells you they're obviously drugged, that's not enough evidence by itself. Now, another major concern with this industry all across the world, not just Thailand, of course, has to do with tourist safety. You could very well make the argument that they are the dangerous animal. Even a tiger that has spent its entire life around humans is still a tiger. And this point became very clear in a viral video that went around in 2025 showing a tourist being attacked by a tiger during a close encounter in Thailand. However, this incident did raise legitimate questions about close contact tiger tourism. Now, this isn't the only incident that has made it to the masses. There have been plenty of documented controversies involving tiger tourism in Thailand. Perhaps the most famous example is the Tiger Temple in Kanchanaburi. In 2026, Thai authorities raided the attraction and ultimately removed 147 tigers from the site. During the operation, authorities found dozens of dead cubs stored in a freezer. The discoveries led to allegations involving illegal breeding and trafficking. The facility was then shut down as a tourist attraction. Now, of course, even with stories like this, there is an important distinction to make. This, of course, doesn't prove guilt of every tiger tourism facility across the country. But it did, however, demonstrate that serious problems could exist behind an attraction that, from the outside, looked like a place where tourists were simply getting a unique experience with these animals. And this ultimately began to change the conversation around Thailand's tiger tourism industry as a whole. In just February of this year, 2026, it's reported that 72 tigers died at 2 different tourist attraction parks in Chiang Mai. Thai authorities said the deaths were caused by canine distemper virus rather than rumors around bird flu. The affected parks operated under the Tiger Kingdom name, and authorities closed them while the situation was investigated. Necropsies also found bacterial infections as well as other conditions that raised questions of mistreatment. A veterinarian involved in the investigation suggested that a common food source could have potentially played a role, but said further investigation was needed. The authorities did end up attributing the deaths to disease. Disease killing animals doesn't necessarily mean that this was some type of mismanagement by the park, but it is an important thing to keep an eye on. Now, just like any other conversation or argument, there are 2 sides to it. Proponents of these facilities cite that they provide jobs, they generate tourism revenue, and of course, they can give visitors an opportunity to learn about tigers. Some facilities describe themselves as educational institutions and say they provide veterinary care as well as controlled environments for animals that could not survive in the wild. And there's also a reasonable argument to state that people are more inclined to care about an animal and want that animal to stay around, to still be a part of our planet if they have had the chance to see one, maybe even interact with one. They don't necessarily need to, play with his tail and pet it. But I mean, a lot of my interest in conservation and trying to protect our, awesome critters we have across the planet as because a lot of it has come from interactions and being able to see them in person. And then, of course, there are legitimate captive breeding and conservation programs all across Thailand and the rest of the world. So simply saying it's a zoo, therefore it's bad, doesn't really cover the full scope of what these facilities can or cannot be. I think the actual important question to ask here is, what standard do we need to set to make sure these types of places are meeting that? Critics argue that the commercial incentive itself creates a fundamental conflict. If a tiger generates more money when tourists can touch it, feed it, or take selfies with it, the business, of course, has an incentive to provide those interactions. And those interactions themselves aren't necessarily what is best for the tiger. Animal welfare researchers have raised concerns about enclosure size, enrichment, breeding practices, human interaction as a whole, as well as behavioral welfare in specific Thai facilities. Some organizations also argue that tourists should avoid attractions based around direct physical contact with big cats because the demand for those experiences can encourage breeding and practices designed primarily around entertainment as opposed to the welfare of the animals. But of course, no 2 facilities are identical. Problems here may not necessarily be problems there, which is an important distinction to make. So at this point, I will leave the question with you. Should tourists be allowed to physically interact with captive tigers for photographs and entertainment? This is, of course, where the debate becomes much more nuanced. There is no black and white situation here. The evidence we have currently does not give us one overarching answer when it comes to the differences between these facilities in Thailand or the world over. What it does tell us is that there are documented welfare concerns across parts of the industry. And at the same time, these claims that every facility that provides these interactions is somehow abusing its animals is not substantiated by evidence. So the next time you see a photo of somebody sitting next to a tiger in Thailand or anywhere for that matter, maybe the question shouldn't be, should this be allowed? Maybe it should be, what is the situation for that tiger to make that photo possible? And at the end of the day, if you decide that that's a reasonable trade-off, if this tiger can stand to gain enough benefits and have a quality of life that makes those photos okay, well, that's entirely up to you.